Hey everyone, welcome to the OklaRoots YouTube channel. In today's tutorial, we are going to make the most beautiful shoulder bag I have ever made. Today, we're gonna make the Ava shoulder bag, and this pattern comes to us from Bagstock Designs. I love Bagstock design patterns so much. They are classy and they are classic. And this shoulder bag is exactly both of those things. I do want to note that if you're not a fan of shoulder bags, you can easily make a crossbody strap and make it a crossbody bag if you really like that longer look. So let's run through this beautiful bag. You have a front panel here with a flap and a twist lock, so stinking cute. On the back panel, you have two pieces of material that are going to hold that flap in place. You do have a zipper panel on the top, which gives a really beautiful shape to the bag. It has kind of like a pyramid shape, but it also makes the bag a lot more accessible instead of just having the zipper right in the seam. When we open up the zipper, inside we have a zipper pocket, and then we also have a card slot slip pocket. I don't know if you guys can see. You can see the stitching. There are 6 card slots and 1 large slip. So this is a pretty quick, definitely I would say scrap friendly bag. None of these pieces of material are too large. Probably your largest pieces of material are going to be your gusset. If you're loving the material on this bag, which honestly you should, it's gorgeous. This is actually all from the bag making Babe box. So this is the tutorial for the Babe box for end of November into December. And this is our beginner subscription box. I know, this is a beginner subscription box. I've said this before, but just because something is beginner friendly doesn't mean that it's easy and fast and just one zipper and you're done. Beginner friendly means that there's nothing really technical or strategic when it comes to making this bag. The material I'm using today is all very, very easy to work with on a domestic machine. Yes, we have corners. Yes, we have some new hardware like a twist lock. We do have card slot pockets. Card slot pockets, totally optional. If you're not comfortable with that, leave them off. Twist lock, if you're not ready for that, you can use a magnetic snap. Just install that there, easy peasy. However, how we put together this bag comes together so beautiful. And I'm gonna give you a couple extra little tips and tricks along the way of where I see a part that could be a little challenging for a beginner, and some adjustments you can make to make it a lot easier. So thank you so much, as always, to Bagstock Designs for allowing me to feature your panels on the channel. If you haven't checked out their site, please make sure you go ahead and do that. Some of my absolute favorite patterns come from Bagstock. Bagstock Designs is one of those designers that I know any pattern she puts out, I'm easily going to be able to follow and make, and it's going to turn out just as perfect as the photo on her pattern. So she's a very trusted pattern designer. So if you've been interested in anything like this, go check out her site. She's got everything: tote bags, backpacks, all kinds of stuff. Thank you also to the Bag Making Bee Club for sponsoring today's video. The Bee box and the Babe box, those are 2 different subscription boxes. The Bee box, which is not this one, that is an intermediate level monthly subscription box, is great for those of you who have experience with beginner stuff. You're well past the zippers and the hardware and you want to try something a little bit more challenging. That's going to be a great box for you. The Babe box, which is what I'm showing you right here, this is specifically targeted to beginners, people who are just starting out in bag making. Maybe you've been quilting, maybe you've done clothes, and you're interested in bag making, but you know, the thickness of seams, zippers, hardware, all that can be a little overwhelming. This is a subscription box where we're going to walk you through everything. In the subscription box, you get everything you need. The only thing you wouldn't get is my personal bag tag. Other than that, you got everything you see here. If you're new to the OklaRoots YouTube channel, please consider clicking subscribe down below. If at any point you like this video, please give it a like. Any questions, comments, shoutouts, leave them down below. Is there another bag from Bagstock you'd like to see on the channel? Go ahead and leave a comment down below. You can also search the OklaRoots YouTube channel. We've done a lot of Bagstock patterns, so go check out those too. See if there's any of those that interest you. I absolutely love every single one of them. All right, guys, let's get started. So for this pattern, you're going to need about 1/4 yard of exterior fabric, and for that, I'm using a bonded nylon. You guys know I love bonded nylon because I don't have to add any interfacing to it, and it's easy to keep clean, easy to wipe down, just a really easy material altogether. Easy to work with, easy to have a bag with. And then you're going to need a 1/2 yard of contrasting fabric. Now I'm going to tell you, you don't really need a full 1/2 yard. You're going to have a lot of extra with this. The reason for the 1/2 yard measurement is because of the length. You do need a nice long strap here for either a crossbody strap or a shoulder strap. I'm going to be doing the shoulder strap, but still you're going to need a nice long piece of material for that. So that's really why there's half a yard for contrast. And then you're gonna need a half a yard of your lining material. And for that, I'm using this, feels like a waterproof, maybe water resistant canvas. Waterproof and water resistant canvas are essentially the same thing, except waterproof is just a little bit stiffer, a little bit thicker than water resistant canvas. This does feel just like it has like a little bit more firmness to it, so I do believe it's a waterproof. But either one will be great here. I will tell you, we're building card slot pockets with this, which can be tricky with the bulk. I'm gonna give you an alternative option. We'll see if it works, but just note, that's what we're gonna be using. I'll put up a cut guide real quick, especially for the exterior material if you're using the babe box, because you do need to be a little aware of how to cut everything out. My suggestion is always trace out all your pattern pieces before you cut them, just to make sure you have enough of your material. You can use an air erasing marker, a chalk pencil, just do it on the wrong side of the material, and if you don't have enough and you gotta change it, you can just put it back in your stash. It's no harm done. All right, here's our hardware. You're going to have 2 zippers. One is gonna be 14 inches long and the other is gonna be 9 inches long. I'm using number 5 zippers for both. I have 2 zipper pulls to go with that. Obviously the zipper pulls are also number 5. Then you're gonna have 2 swivel hooks and 2 D-rings. These are both 3/4 of an inch wide. Then you're gonna have a turn lock. Now you could use a magnetic snap instead if you'd like, but if you haven't done a turn lock before, this is a really nice basic one, and I'll walk you through exactly how to do this. This is a great pattern to try this out on. Then we have 2 3/4 inch wide strap ends. These are completely optional, but they look so nice on the end, especially if you're making the shoulder strap, because the shoulder strap doesn't hide its ends like a crossbody strap does. So we're gonna use these beautiful strap ends for that. Then we have 6 rivets. Rivets are completely optional if you don't use rivets, if you don't have a setting tool or anything, that's fine. But they do make it a little bit easier in some parts of the pattern. So I'll explain how we use those and what to do alternatively if you don't want to use the rivets. And then obviously I have my bag tag. Okay, so here's all the other stuff. I know there's a lot, but not all of it's totally necessary. So I have my rivet press and hole punch. If you're not using rivets, you don't need this, but it is a really good investment if you are a bag maker and you know you're gonna be doing this for a while. This is an investment I would definitely suggest. Then for my top thread, I will be using this Size Swag Tex 45 weight thread in color Buttercream. This is a color I've been using a lot lately. I really love how neutral it is. It kind of blends in, even in dark material. It's not like really in your face. So I really like this. This is a thicker thread, so it's gonna go through the needle, but I'm not gonna use this in my bobbin because it will just unravel and cause a huge problem. So instead, in my bobbin, I have a Mara 100 weight thread. This is also a polyester thread, but it's more lightweight, makes my bobbin happy, but still nice and strong. The needle I'm going to be using today is a Microtex 8012 needle. I will tell you there's one part where the seams can get very thick, and that is with the card slot pockets. You might want to increase your needle size at that point. However, we'll see. I'm going to try to make a little change. We'll see if it works. Then I have my turning wand to help poke out corners, smooth out edges. I have a lighter to clean up loose threads. A 1 inch by 6 inch roller is just really useful for placing everything. A stiletto to hold everything in place at the machine. A seam ripper. Seam ripper is really helpful because again, we're not always perfect, but it's also really helpful with that twist lock. Then I have an air erasing marker and a pencil. I have these small snips. These are like applique scissors. These are going to be helpful with that turn lock. We have to be careful with how we cut out the hole for part of the turn lock. Smaller, really sharp scissors are really useful for that. Lots of plastic clips. I have small screwdriver set. This is also for that turn lock. And then I have some tape and glue. This is for my metal bag tag. If you're not using a metal bag tag, you don't really need this. You might want to use the glue for the twist lock or the turn lock. I will, so I'll show you how to do that. And then I have 2 sizes of double-sided tape, a 1/4 inch wide and an 1/8 of an inch wide. Also, have some sort of tape that you can hold on top of things. So this is a 3M transport tape. I think you can just get this at like the grocery store. However, you can also just use the Kimberbell paper tape, which is what I normally use. And this is great for holding things down on top of material and sewing over, and it doesn't gum up your needle or anything. So let's go through the pattern pieces. First, we have pattern piece A. This is going to be the exterior front of your bag, and you're going to have 1 cut of exterior material, and then you're going to have 2 cuts of your lining material. I'm not using any interfacing or stabilizer on any of these pieces. Next, we have pieces B and C. B is going to be the exterior back top, and C is the exterior back bottom. 1 cut of exterior for both of these. Then we have pattern pieces D. You're gonna have 1 cut of your contrasting and 1 cut of your exterior. So you could use lining here if you'd like. You can use both sides as the vinyl if you'd like. We're not adding any interfacing or stabilizer to this, but it does hold hardware. So again, if you're like, I don't know about the bonded nylon with the vinyl, I will tell you the bonded nylon is extremely durable, even more so than vinyl sometimes. So I think this combination is great and will definitely last a long time. Then we have pattern piece F, which is our zipper pocket facing, and then we have pattern piece G, which are 2 cuts of lining, and these are for the interior zipper pocket. Now we have pattern pieces H and I, and these are both for your card slot pockets. If you don't feel like you will ever need to use a card slot pocket on your bag, you can just skip this. If you're a very, very beginner and you're worried about making card slot pockets, you can skip this. You don't have to include the card slot pockets. They are not essential in the pattern. They are an add-on. So if you want to make them, I highly suggest you do. I'm just trying to say that this is not a deal breaker for the pattern, but you are going to need your bigger cut of material for the card slots, and then you're going to have a smaller cut of material. It's going to be the card slot backing. I'm going to be trying out something a little different with the pattern. I did find that when we build this per the pattern, the side seams get very bulky because the card slots, they fold over themselves. They create this stack, this very thick seam, which is fine, but then we end up folding it into a seam allowance and it like doubles the thickness. That can be difficult on some people's machines, and so I'm trying out something a little bit different. I actually made my pattern piece I 1 inch wider. Okay, so the longest edge, I made it 1 inch wider than what the pattern suggests. And I'm gonna walk you through how to do this, okay? So I think this is gonna work out. But my goal is to make sure we don't fold the seam with all the card slot pockets, and we don't fold it in on itself and create a really thick seam that can be difficult for you to sew over. Now we have pattern pieces J. You're gonna have 4 cuts of exterior material. This is gonna be for the zipper closure on the top of the bag. If you wanna use 2 pieces of exterior, 2 pieces of lining, that's fine. If you wanna use some vinyl here, that's fine. You might find it a little difficult with vinyl if you're a newbie. If you have experience working with thicker seams, then you are good to go with the vinyl. I'm just gonna use 4 cuts of my bonded nylon because that's really the easiest for me to work with. And then I have my gusset, which is pattern piece K. I'm gonna use 1 cut of my vinyl for the exterior. So the vinyl is going to be the exterior piece, which is the contrasting piece. And then I'm gonna use a cut of my exterior material, which is my bonded nylon. I'm actually gonna use this in the lining. And the reason for that is because 1, it looks really cool. And 2nd, because the gusset really adds a lot of structure to our bag. And since we're not using stabilizer, we have to be smart with our material. This bonded nylon and vinyl combo gives a nice thickness to the bag so that the bag will still keep its shape even though it doesn't have that stabilizer. And then finally we have pattern piece L, which is gonna be 2 cuts of material. These are for the side connectors of the bag. I will tell you from experience that vinyl rips quicker than bonded nylon. I have had vinyl attached to D-rings tear over time from heavy use. It's just the way that the coating on the vinyl, it's just the way it's happened. I have not had that problem with bonded nylon. And the way that we are constructing these D-ring tabs and installing them on the gusset, it's a lot easier to do with bonded nylon than it is to do with the vinyl. So that's why I'm using that. You do you, but I would suggest you give it a shot. Then finally, we have our strap. You can make a crossbody strap if you like. I believe even if you're using the babe box, you do have enough vinyl where you can make multiple strips and then sew them together to create a nice long strap. However, you don't have the hardware for it. So I will be doing the shoulder strap. If you are doing the babe box and you do want to do the crossbody strap, the only other piece of hardware you need is a straps adjuster. So like something like this. That's all you need. You have the swivel hooks, you have the strap ends, D-rings are already there. The only thing you would need is this hardware right here, and then you can make an adjustable crossbody strap. All right, so let's install the male end of our turn lock. And just because I'm not using stabilizer doesn't mean I'm not going to stabilize some of these pieces. So this is a piece of hardware that's going to be pulled on, and that's going to get a lot of pressure. And I have a pretty lightweight piece of material here, so I do need to stabilize that piece. And a great thing to use is just scraps of vinyl. So you have lots of extra vinyl if you have the babe box, or just any sort of scraps. If you have scraps of stabilizer, scraps of any sort of material, just use that to stabilize this. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna flip this over to the wrong side of our pattern piece A, and we're going to measure down 2 3/4 of an inch from the top edge and make sure you have the midpoint marked on the top and the bottom of this panel. And then we're just going to mark that midpoint, like I said, 2 3/4 of an inch down. and then grab the washer for this turn lock. And when you have washers in hardware, you need to make sure you know where they line up with the holes on the washer. It's not always where you think it's gonna be. So like for this one, you would think they would kind of line up on like the two outer edges of the washer, the two outer holes. They don't. They line up on, like if I do it on the first hole over here on the left, the other end goes to the hole that's second in from the right. So make sure you know how this is centered on your washer before you use it to put it on the bag. So this is going to allow me to see, okay, I need to go 1, 2, 3, 3 holes in from the left. That's going to be the center of my washer. So I'm going to use that hole to center over my dot that I marked on the back of my panel. And then I'm going to draw in the first and the fifth holes. That's going to be placement for my hardware, and it's centered. So it's always take that time to make sure you are properly centering your hardware. So I'm going to do the same thing on the back of my scrap of vinyl. I'm just going to switch over to a different color chalk pencil so I can see it. So now I can grab my seam ripper, and I can just seam rip where those holes are on my stabilizer, and very, very carefully seam rip on your exterior piece. You can easily lose control of a seam ripper and just slice it all the way to the top, which would be very bad. So don't do that. There we go. Very carefully. So now you see when I flip this to the right side, I can insert those prongs into those slits. Isn't that pretty? And then flip this over. And then I'll add my stabilizer cut behind it, just like that. And then I'll add my washer, just like that. Now this is a little tricky because you got to kind of hold it with your hands to flatten it out, and then press. You can press these prongs in on each other or away from each other. I like to overlap them just like that. Make sure it all looks straight on the front. Should be good. Very nice. So then the last thing I'm going to do on the back is I'm just going to cover up the back of this metal. You can cover it up with some fusible fleece. I mean, you can fuse something on, you can glue something on, you can actually grab a little piece of your bonded nylon and just glue it over this. You just don't want this metal touching the back of your lining because over time it will rub a hole into it. And we want these bags to last as long as possible. So by just adding some durable tape over it, we don't have to worry about that probably ever. So now let's work on our flap. So take both of your flap panels and lay them right sides together. And we're just going to match them up edge to edge, corner to corner. And then use some clips to clip along the sides and also the bottom. But you can leave the top straight edge unclipped. We're not going to sew over that right now. So now let's take this to the sewing machine and just sew along the sides and the bottom, all the clipped edges at a 3/8 inch seam allowance, back stitching at the beginning and the end. Once you have this sewn, you can cut the corners down at a slanted angle. And then I'm just going to cut the seam allowance in half. All the way around the sides and the bottom curve. And then on that bottom curve, I'm also going to use my scissors to just cut little tiny slits into the seam. I'm not getting too close to the thread. I'm not getting like really, really close to it, but I'm cutting about halfway into what I have left of this seam all the way around the curve. And then we're going to just flip this out so it's right side out. And this is where I like to use that turning wand and really push out the edges here. Now, if you're going to use stabilizer, now's the time to slide that in here. I'm not using a stabilizer cut. However, if you were using a stabilizer cut, my advice to you is just to slide it in as best you can. I find that my seam allowances always end up being a little bit bigger than I mean them to be. And so I'll try to put the stabilizer in and it's kind of frumpy. It doesn't sit well. So take it out, trim down the sides a little bit, put it back in, just out and in, until you get it the exact right size. But I'm not using stabilizers, so I am just going to grab some clips and I'm going to roll out these seams and flatten them out really nice and use clips to help hold everything in place. All right, once you get this nice and flattened out, we're going to take this back to the sewing machine and we're going to top stitch along all the edges, even that top straight edge, all the edges at 1/8 of an inch seam allowance. I suggest you start and stop along the top raw edge and back stitch at the beginning and the end. All right, once you have this top stitched, go ahead and mark the midpoint along that top raw straight edge. I'm just going to use scissors to mark that. Okay, so now grab your exterior, back, top, and bottom pieces and your flap. We're going to attach all these together. So using the exterior bottom piece, make sure you have the midpoints marked on the top and the bottom, lay it right side up, and then take your flap, and you're gonna lay your flap so that it is contrast material, the side you wanna see in the end. That side is going to be facing down towards the bottom panel. Use the midpoint marks on the top edges to line these up and clip them together. And then you can just go baste along this top clipped edge at an 1/8 of an inch seam allowance. Once you have the flap basted onto the bottom, then you're going to take the exterior top back panel, you're going to lay that right side down. So the top part, the shorter part of the long edge is the top, and the longer part is the bottom. So you're going to lay it so it's bottom, right sides together with the top of the bottom panel. You know what I'm saying. and just match up their midpoints first and then clip along their long edges. And now let's go sew along this clipped edge at a 3/8 inch seam allowance, back stitching at the beginning and the end. Once you have that sewn, take the top part and the flap and flip both of those up and away from the bottom. And as you do that, that seam is gonna push down and the whole seam is gonna be underneath the bottom exterior panel. That's where we want it. So we're gonna just flatten out that seam. I'm just gonna use my fingers to do this, but if you have quilt cotton, you can grab an iron and press this. Just be careful if you are using vinyl for this flap. You don't want the iron to touch that. But I'm just gonna give it a good finger press, and then we're gonna go back to the sewing machine and we're gonna top stitch along the bottom edge of that seam at an 1/8 of an inch seam allowance, holding the seam behind the bottom panel. Once you have this all sewn, grab your pattern piece A, and we're going to overlay this and use it as a guide to trim this down if we need to. So you're gonna line it up with the top corners of your back panel here and that top edge. And then we're just gonna focus on the bottom. Mine is like an 1/8 of an inch longer on the bottom than the pattern piece, which, you know, I have some bowing up here, so I'm okay with it. But if you have like a 1/4 inch or more, what you're gonna do is you're just going to flatten this out over that back panel and just use a marking tool to trace around the bottom corners, the bottom edge, everything, and then just cut that down so it's the exact right size. It's gonna make it a lot easier in the end when we put it all together if they're the same size. All right, so I'm gonna attach my bag tag to the back here. I'm gonna put it right underneath the flap. And let's see, how do I want this to look? I like to just lay it out and just say like, that looks nice. So I'm gonna go about 1 1/4 inch down from the seam between the bottom and top edges and centered. And then I will just mark the midpoint right there. And then I'm gonna use my washer to mark placement for the prongs. If you're using a sew-on bag tag, you can do the same thing. You just don't need to use all these extra pieces of material and hardware and stuff. And then I'm going to very, very, very carefully cut this. This is a new seam ripper, so it's a lot more powerful than I'm used to. I have to be very gentle with it. There we go. And then I'm gonna use, once again, a scrap piece of vinyl as my stabilizer. So I'm going to mark prong placements on that as well and carefully cut those. All right, so let me just give it a test run. I'm gonna take my bag tag, insert it here. Yes, very nice. Very, very nice, I like that. Okay, so with metal bag tags, I always like to add some glue to the back of them. I have previously had bags that I wore every single day, and after years of wearing them, the bag tags would catch on something and just rip off. So to help, you know, have them last longer, I like to use glue. I like to just put some glue on the back of the hardware and then carefully insert this into the slit. Make sure it's straight. There we go. Flip this over, add my stabilizer, add my washer, fold down the prongs, and just like we did in the beginning, add some tape. But before you add the tape, make sure this is straight. This is your last moment you can adjust it. There we go. And then add a couple pieces of tape over that metal backing. Okay, your back panel is all ready to go. If you're adding stabilizer to this, like fusible fleece or Decaville Light, you can now adhere your stabilizer over the back side of this panel and then set this to the side. So now we're gonna work on the card slot pockets. I'm gonna try to see if I can show you why I want to adjust this. So over here on the side, when we top stitch this card slot pocket down to the lining, this can be very bulky. I did not have trouble. Okay, so on my machine, on my Bernina 770 with a Microtex 8012 needle, I did not have a hard time stitching this down. However, if you're using waterproof canvas or water resistant canvas, it can get bulky. So I want to offer you an alternative. I'm going to end up making this pocket just about 1/2 of an inch wider than it is right now. It's still gonna fit just fine. It's just gonna be a bit wider. So now we're gonna make the accordion part of the card slot pocket. Now, I don't know if you can see, but you're gonna make a series of lines. The measurements are in the pattern. The right side, you're gonna make 3 horizontal lines, and on the wrong side, you're going to make 3 horizontal lines. Make sure you know which side is the right side, which side is the wrong side. I know this material doesn't really show it very well, does it? But just know, everywhere we fold, we're gonna see the line. So starting with the wrong side on the very top, we're gonna fold the material so that it's right sides together and just pinch along that line. And I like to use clips. If you're using quilt cotton, you can iron this. You can iron water-resistant canvas too. You just don't want your iron to touch the back of it, so you would need to use a pressing cloth. I mean, I don't know what's quicker. It's probably quicker to iron it, but I'm just gonna use clips. So that's the first one. So this is the wrong side of the material. I just made a little mountain on that line. So now I'm gonna flip this over to the right side of the material, and I'm gonna find the first line on the top here, and I'm gonna make a mountain there. So I'm just gonna press it and use clips to just pinch right along that marked line. So you see, this is the right side, this is the right side, and this is the wrong side. So looking at the wrong side again, I'm gonna go back to the next line, and I'm just going to pinch a mountain. So you're gonna do this for all of your marked lines, whether it's on the right side or wrong side of your material. Where you see the line, you're going to fold it to make a mountain, and then press it or clip it to hold it in place. Okay, it's a bit of a mess if you're using clips. It gets to be pretty cumbersome, but just bear with me for now. Looking at the right side of your material, so make sure you have the right side of your material facing up. You should have 1, 2, 3 folded clipped edges, so 3 mountains. On each one of these, you're gonna pull all the material away from one mountain, and you're just going to top stitch along the folded edge at an 1/8 of an inch seam allowance. You're gonna repeat that for all 3 of your folds on the right side of your material. Don't worry about the folds that are on the wrong side, on the bottom. Don't worry about those. Just do the right side folds. All right, once you have those top stitched, lay your panel right side up, and you can start removing the clips from the back side folds if you use them like I did, and then just add them to the sides instead. And try to hold everything together. The pattern is going to tell you exactly how tall this should be, so make sure to adjust the panel. You have some wiggle room here to kind of pull it up or tuck it in. Take the time to use the grid on your cutting mat to make sure this is the right height. Once you're good with the height, take this back to the sewing machine and baste along both sides that are clipped at an 1/8 of an inch seam allowance. On each one of these, start basting from the bottom of the card slot pocket and work your way up. So if you haven't already, you're gonna wanna mark the midpoints on the top and the bottom of your card slot pocket, and then use a chalk pencil or an air erasing marker and just mark a vertical line going between midpoint to midpoint right down the center of your card slot pockets. And then what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna start top stitching at the bottom of this pocket, and I'm just gonna top stitch right over that line all the way to the top mark, and then turn around and just top stitch all the way back down right over the original stitches. Okay, now we need to add the back onto our pocket, and here's where I'm going to change it up just a little bit. Flipping both the card slot panel and the backing panel over, so we're looking at the wrong sides. Along the top edge, make sure you know which is the top edge. Along the top edge of each of these, I marked a horizontal line that is 3/4 of an inch down, okay? So we did that. So what you're going to do, starting with that, is you're gonna wanna fold that top edge back to meet that line. You can use double-sided tape here if you'd like, or you can just use clips, or you can even just use an iron and press this. But what you're doing is you're folding the top edge back by 3/8 inch. So it'll give you a 3/8 seam allowance in the end. So I'm gonna do this for both of my panels, folding it back. Now, since I'm changing up my method a little bit, I'm also gonna do that on the bottom edge, except on the bottom edge, I marked a 1/2 of an inch up because my seam allowance down there is not gonna be 3/8 of an inch. It's gonna be 1/4 of an inch. So along the bottom edge of each of these panels, I marked a horizontal line that is 1/2 of an inch up from the bottom, and I'm going to just fold that seam back. So now I'm folding back a 1/4 inch seam allowance. You'll notice that folding back a 1/4 of an inch is a little bit trickier than a 3/8 of an inch. I believe if you wanted to do 3/8 of an inch on the bottoms as well, you'd probably be fine. And this part, this bottom edge fold, this is not part of the pattern. This is my own tweak to see if I can make the side seams a little bit more manageable when I'm using water resistant canvas. If you're using quilt cotton for this or a really lightweight material, you do not need to make these alterations. Just go with the pattern and sew these together like they say to do. But if you're using a thicker material for your lining, which I like to do because then I don't have to add stabilizer, sometimes you gotta tweak things a bit. Okay, those are folded. So now what we're gonna do is we're going to take these two panels and we're going to lay them right sides together. Don't worry about all the clips. I'm gonna start on the left edge over here. I'm gonna match it up corner to corner, edge to edge on the left edge and just clip along that short raw edge. Try to make sure you keep your folds in place wherever you have them. And I'm going to sew along this left clipped edge only, just the raw edge, at a 1/4 inch seam allowance, back stitching at the beginning and the end. Okay, so after you sew that edge, if you flip this over, you'll see that the back panel is quite a bit longer than the card slot panel. That's okay. What we're going to do now is we're going to lift up that back panel and we're going to bring the right raw edge, right sides together with the right edge of the card slot panel. And we're going to clip along the right side short edge now, making sure once again you keep all your folds in place. And now we're going to sew along that right short edge at a 1/4 inch seam allowance, back stitching at the beginning and the end. Okay, so if you're following my method, you should have something like this where the back panel is kind of bowed up. And now we're going to gently flip this right side out, trying to keep everything folded the way it's supposed to be folded. And when you do this, if you were following per the pattern, what you would end up having to do is you would have to fold this seam where that thick seam is there. You would have to fold it back, and it gets pretty thick. Like you would have all the fold over bits of the card slot folded a second time, and it can be pretty thick, which is why I adjusted this, because I don't want that. What I want is I want that seam that has all the folds of the card slot pocket, I want that to stay flat and the back panel to just kind of wrap around the seam, so I'm not folding it. So I'm just gonna work on straightening this out and get the sides to wrap around, and then I'm just going to keep all the folds on the top and the bottom in place and clip them together. And then I'm gonna do the same thing on the bottom. I'm just gonna keep that fold in place. The bottom fold is a little bit trickier because it's a skinnier fold, but just keep everything folded down and use the clips or tape or an iron to help keep everything together. So now flatten this out really nice, and it did work. Yay! So happy. So you can see, I don't know if you can see in the camera, but you see how there's like a little border right here on the side, on both sides? That's that back panel wrapping around to the front panel so that I don't have to worry about this seam folding a second time. Like I said, in the end it makes it, just a 1/2 inch wider, which is gonna be fine when we put this on the lining. But if you're using thick material, it's easier to sew. So now we're gonna go to the sewing machine and we're gonna top stitch along the top edge, just the top edge, not the bottom edge yet, at a 1/8 inch seam allowance, back stitching at the beginning and the end. All right, once you have that stitched in place, if you have any like little loose threads up here on the top, just melt them down with a lighter. Now grab one of your lining pattern piece E's and lay it right side up, and then grab a ruler and we're gonna measure 1 3/4 inch down from the top midpoints. Make sure you have midpoints marked on the top and the bottom of this. And then you're gonna take your card slot pocket and you're gonna match up the top midpoint of your card slot pocket with the midpoint that is 1 3/4 inch down. And then I'm just gonna use tape to tape this in place. All right, once you have this taped down, we're gonna go to the sewing machine and we're gonna top stitch along the sides and the bottom edge, all at an 1/8 inch seam allowance, just top stitching this to the lining panel. Go slow, especially if you have your bottom edge clipped and it's folded in place. Always double check to make sure the folds are holding, they're not slipping out. You don't want anything getting loosey-goosey down there. Back stitch at the beginning and the end. And there we go. Card slot pockets are installed. I love how the white thread or the buttercream thread looks. And this is cool because it's 6 card slot pockets, right? 1, 2, 3. And then 1 large slip pocket. So handy. You can set this lining panel to the side now. Okay, so now we're gonna work on our zipper pocket. So you're gonna need your other main lining panel. You're gonna need your zipper facing, the smaller zipper, and both of the zipper pocket lining pieces. On the back of your zipper facing, you're going to measure in 3/4 inch from all 4 edges and then create this inner rectangle by just marking horizontal and vertical lines. You can set that to the side, and then we're gonna work on our zipper. So take one of your zipper pocket lining panels and lay it right side up. Take your zipper and lay it right side up. And I already have the pull attached to it. And I'm also going to melt down these edges of my zipper so the fraying doesn't become a problem. And with both the lining panel for the zipper pocket right side up and the zipper right side up, I'm just going to line up the zipper along the top edge and clip it in place. And now I'm just going to sew along this top clipped edge at a 1/4 inch seam allowance. Back stitch at the beginning and the end. Once you have the zipper stitched in place, you're going to press the lining panel away from the zipper, but keep the zipper flat. So you're not folding the zipper seam, you're folding the seam for the lining panel. Grab your remaining zipper lining panel and lay it right side up. Take your zipper, lay it right side up, working on the opposite edge of the zipper tape. And when you do this, your zipper tape is wider than the panels are. So make sure you're lining up the edges of the panel with one another, not the edge of the zipper on the sides, but line up the top of the zipper with the top edge of the lining panel and then clip along that top edge. Remember, your zipper is right side up and the lining panel that's on the bottom underneath all this is right side up, but the lining panel that's on the top is wrong side up. So your lining panels are right sides together. Now we're going to sew along this clipped edge at a 1/4 inch seam allowance, back stitching at the beginning and the end. And once you have it sewn on, just press both panels away from the zipper and just finger press that edge nice and flat. If you're using the waterproof canvas like I am, you might notice that as much as you try to press it, you can iron it too. That's probably gonna be your best bet if you just iron it, but just iron it from the right side of the waterproof canvas. So just like this with the zipper facing wrong side up, iron it on that edge. But if you're really struggling to get that to lay flat, what you can do is just take this to the sewing machine and baste along both long edges of the zipper tape to flatten this down really nice. I did that previously. It makes it a lot easier. So I'm going to set that to the side and I'm going to work on my main lining panel with my zipper facing. And you're going to measure 3/4 inch down from the top edge of your main lining panel, and you're going to lay your facing right side down so you can see the rectangle on the back, and use the midpoints to make sure it is centered. Once you have it centered, just tape it in place. Now we're going to take this to the sewing machine and we're going to just stitch right over all 4 lines of that inner rectangle. Shorten your stitch length to about a 2mm stitch length and make sure your needle hits each one of those corners. Back stitch at the beginning and the end. So once you have this stitched in place, you're going to draw a horizontal line that just divides the 2 long edges in half. So it's about a 1/4 inch. Mine's like just slightly under a 1/4 inch. So horizontal line, and then I mark in from each short edge about 3/8 inch, and then I'm just going to draw diagonal lines from the corner to that middle line, meeting at that 3/8 inch mark. Doesn't have to be too exact. So you should have 2 triangles on the sides, straight line in the middle. Use a seam ripper to start cutting along that straight line in the middle between both pieces of material. Once you have a hole big enough, you can put your scissors in there and just cut along that middle line until you get to the tip of the triangle, and then cut along the diagonal to the very corner of your stitching. And you want the tip of the scissors to touch the stitching but not cut it. That's how close you want to get. You want to get the material cut right up to the stitches, but you don't want to cut the stitches because then it will unravel, which would be bad. So just be careful here. All right, once you have that done, I'm going to finger press the facing along the sewn seams before I flip it back. This is kind of hard to do with waterproof canvas, but I believe in you. So now we're going to take that facing and we're going to pull it through that opening that we just cut so that the facing and the main lining panel are now wrong sides together. And now you can use an iron to flatten this out. That's probably going to be the easiest. If you're using waterproof canvas, just make sure you use a piece of quilt cotton as a pressing cloth so that your iron doesn't directly touch the back of the water resistant canvas. Or you can just flatten it with your fingers, and then from the front side, you can iron it from the front side to really get it to hold its shape. I actually just like to use tape most of the time. So I'm going to grab some of my tape once again, and I'm going to just tape down the raw edges to hold it flat. Okay, flatten this out really well. Then grab your zipper and make sure the lining panels are again spread away from the zipper. Lay your zipper tape so it's right side up and zipper is closing towards the left. So the pull moves towards the left when closing. And I'm going to add double-sided tape along both long edges of my zipper tape above and below the stitching. So I don't want this tape to be seen in the end. So I'm just going to make sure it doesn't go past the stitching. And if that means that it overhangs the edge of the zipper tape a little bit, that's actually pretty helpful because then it will help keep it flat. Okay, so just do a test run, grab your lining with the opening, lay it right side up, and you see you're just gonna plop it right over the zipper like that. So make sure the short edges of your facing should line up with the edges of your zipper pockets. So I'm gonna do this one edge at a time. I'm gonna start with the top edge. I'm gonna remove the paper from the double-sided tape, keep the zipper pulled down, take my lining panel, lay it right side up, make sure the edges of the facing are matching up with the edges of the pocket, and then make sure the teeth are lining up centered in that window. If you need to move it around, you can. Once you're happy with the top edge, move the zipper pull up through the window and towards the top, flip up the bottom of the lining, take the paper off the double-sided tape on the bottom edge, and then just fold this back down and press in place. And if you need to adjust it, you can. Double-sided tape, you can just pull it up, move it around. So now, again, with both the zipper lining panels facing away from each other, top and bottom, and your main lining panel right side up, we're going to just top stitch around all 4 edges of this window at 1/8 of an inch seam allowance. I do suggest back stitching at the beginning and the end, and I do suggest you take all 4 threads and pull them through to the back side and tie them off when you're done. All right, there you go. And the nice thing, I know this is dark and it's kind of hard to see in the video, but the nice thing about using the same color material, and especially as a solid dark color material, is that if you messed up a little bit, if things are a little wonky, if the facing is kind of pulling up, you're not gonna notice. Everything looks perfect. So before I move on, I'm just gonna take out the tape where I can. It's okay if you leave some of it in the seams, if that's where it is. So now flip this over and look at the back side of this lining panel. Pull both of those zipper lining panels to the back, and you'll notice that one of them is longer than the other, so the top one is shorter. So just lift them both up. You're gonna cut the longer one, but you're not gonna cut the main lining panel. So it doesn't have to be perfect. You just want them to be about the same size. So now I'm gonna take both of the bottom edges and I'm gonna fold them both up together. Just holding them together. I'm gonna fold them both up by about 1/2 of an inch. And we're just gonna fold them up and clip that fold. And then you can add some clips along the side edges of your 2 zipper pocket lining panels. And then we're gonna flip this over so we're looking at the right side of the lining, fold up the side edges of your lining, and we're going to stitch along both sides of our pocket, anywhere between 1/4 inch to 1/2 of an inch seam allowance. Just make sure you're catching the facing. Back stitch at the beginning and the end. Make sure you back stitch over the folded bottom edge, but you're not gonna stitch along the entire bottom edge. You're just gonna do the sides. All right, there you go. Your zipper is installed. When you put your hand through, you should be able to poke through the bottom of it just like that, but the sides are all sewn up and it's looking nice. So you can set this to the side now. So now let's work on the connectors. So grab both of your connector units and you're going to lay them wrong side up and you're gonna draw a midpoint line between the 2 long edges. And then I'm gonna use some double-sided tape and I'm just going to cover that midpoint line with my double-sided tape and then pull off the paper and then fold the 2 long edges back, wrong sides together to meet that midpoint line and stick it to the double-sided tape. So repeat this for your other connector. All right, once you have both of your connectors folded so the long raw edges are taped to the back, we're gonna take this to the sewing machine and we're going to top stitch along the right side of each one of these along all 4 edges at 1/8 of an inch seam allowance. Okay, once you have these top stitched, then you're gonna wanna mark the middle along the back edge. So you can just fold your connector in half, lining up the 2 short edges, and I'm looking at the wrong side here, and I'm just gonna mark where that midpoint is. And this is really hard to see with the air erasing markers, so you might wanna use some other sort of marking device, like the chalk pencil. And then I'm gonna add a small piece of double-sided tape, like 1/2 of an inch wide or so, just right over the center part. Just right along the middle on the back side. So this is the wrong side here. So now you're gonna take one of your D-rings and you're gonna insert it so the flat edge is against the back edge of your connector. And you're just gonna wrap the connector around that straight edge and pull the raw edge down to meet that midpoint mark and tape it in place. So it should look just like that. And then you're gonna take the bottom raw edge of your connector and fold it back, wrong sides together, also to meet that midpoint line or just the other edge of your connector. So you should have something like this. On the right side, it's nice and clean and folded, no raw edges. On the back side, they're meeting up. Grab another piece of double-sided tape and then just tape right over those 2 ends. This is about 1 inch wide, just like that. So repeat this with the other connector. All right, your 2 connectors are prepped and ready to be added to the gusset. So now grab your gusset cut that you're going to use for the outside of the bag. So for me, it's this contrasting vinyl. And you're going to want to mark the midpoints along both short edges and also the midpoints along both long edges. Looking at the short edge, we're going to take one of our connectors and we're going to center it so that it is 1 3/8 of an inch down from the top short edge of your gusset. So you can remove the double-sided tape from the back of your connector. Make sure you push the D-ring down, and the D-ring part is going to be on the top. And then just center this with your ruler and tape it onto your gusset. There we go. Once you have this taped in place, we're going to go to the sewing machine and we're going to top stitch along the sides, the bottom edge, at 1/8 of an inch seam allowance. We're also going to top stitch right underneath that metal bar, so I suggest using a zipper foot. If you're not going to be adding rivets later to hold this in place, I would also suggest you top stitch like a big X right along the center of that rectangle for extra reinforcement. All right, so I have this stitched on, and I'm going to show you how I tie off the threads. I've mentioned it a couple times, but I'll show you. So you see I have the top threads here on the top of my material nice and long, and I have the bobbin threads on the back nice and long. What you do is you're going to grab one of your bobbin threads, and you're just going to tug on it until you see your top thread pulling towards the back, and it's like a little loop. And then I just grab my stiletto, and I insert the tip into that loop and pull it to the back, just like that. So I do that with both bobbin threads and top threads to get all 4 threads to the back side. And then once you have all your threads on the back, you can just tie them. I tie them in like 3 tight knots. And then you can just trim down the threads, and there you go. So I'm going to add the rivets to this, and then I'm just going to repeat the whole process for the other connector, and I'll do it off camera. So we're going to put 2 rivets here. And for rivet placement, you're going to measure 1/2 inch from the bottom edge of your connector and center a dot there, and then measure 1 inch from the bottom edge of that connector and center another dot, so you have two holes that are 1/2 inch apart, and then just punch the holes for those. And then you can just pop in your rivets and put the cap on. I always put the caps on the back. I don't really think it matters which way you do it, but I feel like everybody kind of has a preference, or just a way of doing it, that they've always done it. There we go. So both are installed. And now I can just grab my rivet press and press these in place by just putting a little bit of pressure on them. It's pretty easy. And there we go. Connector is attached and it looks great. So I'm going to repeat that entire process on the other side, but I'm going to do it off camera because it is the exact same process of what I just did. So once you have your connectors installed, now let's build the exterior. So let's start with the exterior front panel, which has the male end of the turn lock. Lay it right side up, take your gusset, and you're going to lay it right sides together with this. Make sure you have midpoints marked everywhere. Midpoints on the top and the bottom of the main panel, midpoints on the long edges of your gusset, everywhere. And so we're going to match up the bottom edge of our main panel with the gusset, midpoints right sides together. Pull up the top left corner, match that up with the top left corner of your main panel. And for those of you who have never sewn curves before, this is a great one. The measurements are really good for this. The material is really good for this. You're not going to have any problems. So we're going to also match up the top right corners, right sides together, and clip them. And then I always like to just focus on all the straight edges first. And your straight edges are the ones on the main panel. So just look around at where it's fairly straight, and we'll do the corners last. So once you have the top corners, the midpoint, and the straight edges clipped, we're going to flip this over. So we're looking at the back of the main panel. And then the gusset's going to just kind of stand up like a wall. And you're going to just tuck those corners into the gusset. Now, if you notice that when you tuck this in, you start having these like wrinkles and waves along your main panel, you should have those. That's how we get a nice tight fit here. So what you're going to do, I suggest just using 2 cuts. You're just going to cut into the gusset right on that corner, just about 1/8 of an inch to 1/4 of an inch in. And it's going to allow the gusset to spread around those corners and smooth out. And in the end, that gives us that perfect gusset. You don't want to cut too many little slits into the gusset, because then you have the opposite problem where it's like the gusset's almost too long for those corners now. So I just would suggest 2 very small cuts right into the corner of the gusset, not the main panel. So first you got to figure out where it's kind of bubbling by pushing it in, and you see there's my section. So then I'll pull the main panel away. Like 1, 2, just enough for it to spread around those corners. So you kind of flatten it out with your thumb, and then the gusset spreads flat too. Okay, once you have it the way you like it, I like to sew with the gusset wrong side up. That's my personal preference. Some people like to sew it with the main panel wrong side up. I don't do that. I feel like you can't see where your gusset needs to spread more, because as you're sewing curves, sometimes you might notice that your gusset is having a really hard time reaching those curves, and so you need your scissors to cut into the gusset so it can spread more and easily go around the curves. So I like to sew with the gusset wrong side up. We're going to sew at a 3/8 inch seam allowance. I like to use a zipper foot on gussets like this. Backstitch at the beginning and the end. Just take your time, use a stiletto, and once you get to the corners, if you feel like the gusset just won't reach the edge of the main panel seam, you can cut into the gusset just a little bit, just a couple more slits, and let it spread around the corners. All right, once you have this sewn, you can trim the seam allowance down, but don't trim the seam allowance at the top corners. We want those to stay where they are. It's gonna make it easier later. So you can just kind of eyeball about 1 inch down from the top corner, and then I cut into the seam halfway, just perpendicular, halfway in there. And then I'll move that top corner flap out of the way. And then I'm just gonna trim the seam allowance in half around the entire side, corners and bottom and other side. But when I get to the top of the other side, I'm gonna stop about 1 inch away from the top corner and leave that uncut. So you see, the top corners have the full seam, and then I just trim down the rest of the seam. So now we're going to repeat that with the back panel. So take your back exterior panel, lay it right side up, grab your unit with the gusset, and you're going to lay it right side down. Gusset right side together with back panel, line up the midpoint marks on the bottom first and clip these together. And then clip the 2 top corners, and then do the straight edges, and then we'll work on the bottom corners last. I always like to flip it over so I'm looking at the wrong side of the main panel and let that gusset just stand up. And then as you go around the corner, if you need to cut into the gusset to allow it to spread around those corners, go ahead and do that. But remember, you can also not cut into it at all or just a little bit, and then if you need to cut into it more at the machine, you can. So once again, I'm going to sew this with the gusset wrong side up, and I'm going to sew around the entire clipped edge at a 3/8 inch seam allowance, back stitching at the top corners, using a zipper foot, go slow, use a stiletto. If you need to cut into the gusset on the bottom corners so it can spread, take your time to do that. Just go slow. That's the biggest tip with these, go slow. All right, and once you have that sewn, just like we did on the other edge, we're going to trim down the seam allowance, but not at the very top. Leave about 1 inch at the top, untrimmed. And I'm just going to very carefully cut the seam allowance in half. All right, once that's trimmed down, let's flip this out. This is my favorite part. I love looking at the outside of this. So just poke out those corners, make sure everything is nice and smooth. If you're using this material combination, you should have a lot of luck with how it all turns out, because the vinyl is just lightweight enough and has just enough stretch to really not be a problem. Nothing is too heavy duty. Look how pretty that is. Isn't it the prettiest? Oh my gosh, it's so like preppy. That's what it reminds me. It's just very preppy. I love it. Okay, so this to the side. All right, so now we're gonna repeat that with the lining. So remember, I'm using that bonded nylon for the lining gusset. Don't get confused. You can use the waterproof canvas. Will be just as sturdy. It'll be just as good. I just thought this looked cool. So I'm gonna start with my pocket that has the zipper. Make sure it is mostly open. Just mostly open that zipper pocket now. Take your gusset and lay it right sides together. Don't forget your gusset should have midpoints marked on the long edges and on the short edges. So line up the midpoints on the bottom and clip right sides together. And then line up the top corners. And then just clip along the straight edges. And once again, clip around the corners, and if you need to cut into the gusset so that it can spread easier around the corners, go ahead and do that. You probably will want to do that on the lining because the bonded nylon does not have stretch like the vinyl does, and we're going to have a bigger seam allowance on these corners, so you're going to need more space. So you see I just pull away the main panel and I just cut into the gusset. I'm just going to do like 3 little tiny snips. Mine are probably 1/8 of an inch deep. Very, very small snips, but it does help. All right, after you have all that clipped, I would suggest pulling your zipper pocket up and away from the edges so you don't accidentally sew over that. And then just like before, I'm going to sew with the gusset wrong side up. And at the top edges, I'm gonna sew at a 3/8 inch seam allowance. But around the bottom corners and the very bottom straight edge, I'm gonna sew at a 1/2 inch seam allowance. So just maneuver your seam allowance as you go around, but you do wanna make sure that the top edges, so about the top 1.5 inches or so, it needs to be a 3/8 inch seam allowance. Backstitch at the beginning and the end. So I am a lot more loosey-goosey with sewing the corners on the lining because usually there's like a little pleat right there, but we don't turn this out like this in the end. It stays like this and you're never gonna notice. So once again, I'm gonna trim down the seam allowance just like I did on the exterior, but as always, leaving that top inch along the top corners untrimmed. All right, we have one side attached. We're gonna repeat that with the other side. So we're not leaving any sort of hole in the gusset for turning out later. We're gonna completely sew the gussets onto both lining panel. We're gonna turn the entire bag out through that zipper pocket. So that's why it's important that right now you open up that zipper pocket so we don't have to deal with that later. So we're gonna take the gusset and lay it right side down along the other lining panel and match up midpoint to midpoint on the bottom and clip together. And then just clip along the corners, the sides, all just like we've done the last 3 times. Once you have it all clipped and prepped and ready to go, we're once again gonna sew along the clipped edge at a 3/8 inch seam allowance on the top edges, about 1.5 inches or so. And then on the bottom corners and the bottom edge, I'm gonna sew at a 1/2 inch seam allowance. Again, I'm gonna sew with the gusset wrong side up, backstitch at the beginning and the end. All right, finally, if you want to trim down that seam allowance, just a reminder to not trim the seam allowance down at the top. If you do, if you're like, oh, dang it, I forgot, and you trim the seam allowance along the top corner, it's okay, it's not the end of the world. Your bag's still gonna be fine. It's just gonna be a little bit of a pain later. It's literally just leaving it untrimmed makes it easier when we sew it together with the exterior. That's why we do it. Okay, you can set your lining to the side now. So now grab your 4 zipper closures and your 14-inch long zipper with zipper pull attached. And when your zipper closes, it's gonna close towards the left like this, and when it opens towards the right. So you notice when it opens, it like opens, obviously. That's the edge we wanna work on. So I'm looking over here on the left edge of my zipper tape, and I'm gonna measure 1 inch in from that left short edge. I'm just gonna mark right on the edge of my zipper tape where that is. All right, once you have that marked, then you can separate that open side of the zipper, just like that. And at that mark, you're going to pinch the zipper wrong sides together. So I'm going to just pinch right at that 1 inch mark. And as I pinch this, my zipper teeth are gonna go up and away from the center of the zipper. That's what I want. I'm gonna take that pinch and I'm gonna overlay it over the fold over bit of my zipper tape so that the folded edge of the pinch lines right up underneath the teeth that are folded away. And then I'm just gonna use a clip to hold this in place. And I'm gonna repeat this on the other side by pinching, pulling the pinch up, tucking it right against the zipper teeth, and adding a clip. So it should look something like this with the 2 edges pointing away from the center of the zipper tape. And now I'm gonna go to the sewing machine and I'm gonna baste along each of these edges where the fold over is at an 1/8 of an inch seam allowance, use a zipper foot, and just hold that fold in place. Okay, now that you have your zipper prepped, if you'd like to sew over the bottom edge here, you can. I usually just put a clip on there to hold it in place. Now we're going to attach our zipper panels. So I'm gonna do these just a little bit different from the pattern just because it's easier for me. I'm gonna flip over all my zipper panels and on the wrong side on one short edge. So for me, my pattern material doesn't matter. But I'm gonna measure like on the right edge over here on each one of these, I'm gonna measure in 3/4 of an inch and just draw a vertical line. So once I have those lines marked, then I'm gonna grab some double-sided tape and I'm gonna add double-sided tape right along the very edge, the short edge that's right next to those lines. So I'm gonna do this again for all 4 of these. And then you can take the paper off of that double-sided tape and fold that short edge back wrong sides together to meet that marked line. So you have something just like this. Just one short edge of each one of these zipper panels is folded back by 3/8 of an inch. So repeat for all 4 of them. Okay, so now we have all 4 of these ready to go. So I'm going to be using the same material for the back side and the front side. So what I consider the front side is the zipper panel that I'm gonna see when the zipper's right side up. What I consider the back side pieces are the piece you're gonna see when it's upside down, right? I'll try to make sure I mention which one is which in case you're using lining material and exterior material. So we're gonna grab one of our backside pieces. So this would be lining material if you were using that. And you're going to lay it right side up, and the folded over edge that's taped needs to be on the right, and the unfolded edge needs to be on the left. I'm gonna be using tape to help me with this. You're going to measure in 3/8 of an inch from the top left edge. Remember, this is the edge that does not have the fold. 3/8 of an inch, and mark a line on the very top long edge of your material. And then I'm gonna grab 1/8 of an inch wide, so nice and skinny double-sided tape. And I'm going to add the double-sided tape right along that top edge, starting at that 3/8 of an inch mark, all the way along the top edge until I get to the very end where it's folded over, and then just cut that. Once I have that taped, I'm going to remove the paper, and then I'm gonna take my zipper tape, and with the folded over edge of my zipper tape on the left, I'm going to lay my zipper right side up. The folded end of my zipper teeth are gonna match up with that 3/8 of an inch mark, and the top edge of my zipper tape will match up with the top edge of the zipper panel, and just tape this in place along the entire edge. So I'm not gonna worry about basting this because my tape acts as my baste. Then I'm gonna take another one of my zipper panels, and this would be considered the exterior, so the top zipper panel. This is what you'll see when the zipper's right side up. And I'm gonna lay it right side down. Folded over edge is on the right, unfolded edge is on the left. I can move my zipper pull out of the way, just like that. And I'm going to match this up right sides together with the other zipper panel that's taped to my zipper tape. And I'm going to clip along the two short edges on the side here that are raw. And then I'm going to clip along the top edge. And just make sure it matches up short edge to short edge. So once you have this clipped in place, we're gonna go to the sewing machine, and along the short edge over here on the side where the raw edges are, where it's not folded over, you're gonna sew at a 3/8 inch seam allowance. As you get up to the top corner, you're gonna pivot, and you're gonna sew along the long edge of your zipper at a 1/4 inch seam allowance. Backstitch at the beginning and the end, use a zipper foot, use a stiletto, take your time. So once you have it sewn together, you can trim down the zipper overhang a bit. That's the folded over bit, not the tail of the zipper, but the folded over bit over here. And then you can trim down the corner of that short raw edge. You can trim down both corners. If you did trim down your zipper tape, make sure you melt it with a lighter so it doesn't fray. And then we're gonna carefully pull these two zipper panels wrong sides together and push out that corner of the zipper teeth. You can kind of pull on your teeth gently to get it nice and like a nice sharp corner. And then pull these two panels wrong sides together. Since I already have the short edges folded in on each other, I don't have to worry about that. If you were doing it per the pattern, you would now fold them back, and then you'd be where we are now. But I already folded them back. Because to me, for me, that's just an easier method. Everybody has their own way of doing it. If you want to follow the pattern and do it that way. I find when I have to mark a stopping point on my zipper tape, I forget about it, and then I end up having to seam rip and fix it. I just know where I get confused, so that's an easier method for me to just fold it ahead of time. So you can see I'm just clipping along the raw edges, pulling these two zipper panels wrong sides together. And when you close your zipper, you see you have this nice small panel. Isn't that cute? So now get it as flat as you can, and we're gonna take it to the sewing machine, and we're gonna baste along the raw edge at an 1/8 of an inch seam allowance, but we're gonna top stitch along the two short edges and the edge right by the zipper, also at an 1/8 of an inch seam allowance. I just use a top stitch length for the entire thing. I like to start and stop on the raw edge, backstitch at the beginning and the end. Okay, there you go. Isn't that cute? It's pretty simple. So I'm gonna walk you through the next part because it can be confusing sometimes. So you're going to lay the lining or the back side zipper panel right side up, the folded over edge to be on the right again, the unfolded edge is on the left. This time we're working on the bottom edge of this, okay? So you're gonna grab your ruler and you're gonna measure in 3/8 of an inch from the bottom left corner along the bottom edge and make a mark. Now grab your double-sided tape, and once again I'm using the really skinny 1/8 of an inch one. And on the bottom edge, you're going to start at that mark, that's 3/8 of an inch in, and then just adhere it right along the edge all the way to the folded edge, and then remove the paper. So now, with this right side up and the tape on the bottom edge, grab your zipper, and with your zipper right side up, you're going to match up the fold over of the coils on the bottom edge of your zipper with that 3/8 of an inch mark, and match up the bottom edge of your zipper tape with the bottom edge of the zipper panel and just lay these down. Flip this over and make sure that your zipper panel that you're attaching lines up, the folded edge lines up with the folded edge that you've already attached. And then you can open up your zipper to make this easier. Pull the other one out of the way. And then you're going to grab your top zipper accent panel with the folded over edge on the right as normal. And we're going to lay it right sides together with the zipper accent that's taped in place. And we're going to clip along the left short edge that's not folded, clipping the two panels right sides together. Make sure the folded edge on the right over here matches up with the folded edge on the other panel, and then just clip along the zipper edge. All right, now we're gonna go to the sewing machine. I'm gonna start on the zipper side this time, so I'm gonna sew along the zipper edge at a 1/4 inch seam allowance, back stitching at the beginning. Once I get past the fold over of the zipper, I'm gonna sew along the short edge at a 3/8 inch seam allowance, back stitching at the end. So just like I did before, I'm gonna trim down some of that zipper overhang, and then I'm just going to melt that raw edge, and then carefully flip these two zipper panels so they're wrong sides together, and pull on the corners of your zipper teeth to really get it nice and poked out. Fold these two zipper panels wrong sides together, matching up corners to corner, edge to edge, and clip it so it's nice and flat. And if you forgot to trim down the corners of the short edge, don't. Don't forget to do that. It makes it a lot easier if you trim down those corners. All right, get that zipper panel nice and pressed flat, and then you can take it to the sewing machine and just baste along the raw edge, top stitch along the two short edges and the edge by the zipper, all at 1/8 inch seam allowance. I like to start and stop along the raw edge. Okay, once you have them both sewn, it should look just like this. Isn't that cute? I love doing zipper panels. I think they're cool. So now we have to attach this to the lining. So the first thing you want to do is make sure you have midpoints marked on the top edge of your lining bag. And then make sure you mark the midpoint along each long edge of your zipper accent unit. Okay, so in the end, I like my zipper lining pocket to be on the back side. So it's going to go with the back panel. So I'm going to line my bag just like this. So the zipper pocket's in the back, the credit card pocket's in the front. And then I'm just going to take this zipper unit and zipper right side up. I'm just going to flop it in like this. So we're going to match up the midpoints along the back panel first and clip these together using those midpoints. Once you have the midpoints set up, you can unzip the zipper and it'll make it a little bit easier. Just don't let that other zipper panel get in the way. And clip along this edge. You should find that the top corner of your zipper panel gets close to the seam between the gusset and the main panel, but it does not reach it on either side. And I'm just going to do these one at a time. So I'm going to go to the sewing machine and I'm just going to baste along this one clipped edge at 1/8 inch seam allowance, just holding my zipper panel to the lining. So when I'm basting this on, I also like to spread open the seam allowance between the gusset and the main panel that I'm looking at, and then baste that seam allowance open as well. It's just going to make it a little bit easier. You don't have to do that, but it makes the next step easier. So go ahead and close your zipper so it doesn't get twisted or anything. Make sure it's all nice and flat. And then repeat this on the other side. So match up midpoint to midpoint with the zipper panel and the main panel, and clip along the long straight edge. And then once you get started, you can unzip this to make it easier. And you can see over here on the seam where we didn't cut it down, you can just spread it open. And you can even add a clip there and just baste that open as you're basting on your zipper panel. Once you have that clip, just go baste along that top edge at 1/8 inch seam allowance. And there we go. Isn't it cute? It's so sticky. I love this bag so much. All right, let's finish this bag up. So your lining should be wrong side out. Zipper is mostly almost all the way open. Tuck it into the bag. Make sure it's not tangled up or anything. Should be good. And then take your exterior. Your exterior is right side out. We're going to put the exterior inside the lining so that they are right sides together. The flap back panel needs to go right sides together with the zipper panel, okay? So tuck it in here. Flap goes against the zipper side of the lining. And then just use your midpoints and your seams to line up the top edges and just clip these edges together. Remember, your exterior and lining are right sides together. Make sure you match up the seams between the gussets and their main panels and spread them open. So remember, I basted my seam open on the lining side, but on the exterior side, I do need to spread that open with my fingers. Spread that open and then clip it together. So do that for all 4 of your seam combos. All right, once you have the entire top edge clipped, we're going to sew along this edge at a 3/8 inch seam allowance. Take your time here. I'm gonna sew from the inside of the bag. So I'm just gonna open up the bag, sew on the inside, 3/8 inch seam allowance. Go slow, use a zipper foot, make sure your D-rings are pointed down. They shouldn't be too close to the top, so those shouldn't be a problem, but just take your time here. You should not be sewing over your zipper at all. So if your zipper tail is sticking out somewhere, that's no good. Stick it back inside. We are not sewing over that zipper tail. Alrighty, this is the exciting part, guys. So we're gonna turn the bag out through the hole in the zipper pocket of the lining. So be gentle here, make sure the zipper is open all the way. And then just pull the exterior through that and carefully push it all right side out. So once you have it turned out, tuck in your lining into the bag, and we want to straighten out the seam on the top here. So I find it helpful to reach into that hole that we left and use my fingers to really help smush down, especially where the seams are between the main panels and the gussets. Those can get pretty bulky, so make sure that they stay flat. Roll out that seam and then use clips to smooth it down. And these top corners are really the only place where you can use clips to smooth this down because we have the zipper panel along the main front and back. So we're gonna have to just smooth that down with our fingers. All right, once you have the gusset tops rolled and smoothed, you're just gonna wanna go around and smooth down the seam that's below the zipper panels, because that's what we're gonna be focused on now. Make sure your zipper is all the way open. Don't lose your zipper pull. And now we're gonna go to the sewing machine and we're gonna top stitch along this edge. Now this is not the very, very top where the zipper is. This is below the zipper panel, top of the bag. And we're gonna top stitch at an 1/8 of an inch seam allowance around the entire bag. If you have a bed on your sewing machine, I suggest you remove it and just wrap the bag around the arm of the sewing machine and top stitch from the right side. If you can't do that, you can flip this bag so it's lining side out, and then you can top stitch from the inside of the bag if that's easier. Whatever is easiest for you. Just take your time here. Back stitch at the beginning and the end. I always like to start on the gusset. Use a zipper foot. How cute is this bag? Look at that. Isn't that so cute? And then we'll have the little flap. I just can't get over it. You know, it's funny. I've already made it once. So it's not like it's a surprise what it looks like, but I just love it. So now let's close the hole in the lining. So pull up those lining zipper panels. And you should be able to just tuck your finger into the corners. And it should just fold in on itself by about 1/2 of an inch. So just encourage it to stay folded. And then use some clips along that folded edge so we don't have any raw edges at all. And then once you have this nice and straight, we're gonna take it to the sewing machine and just top stitch right along that folded edge at an 1/8 of an inch seam allowance, back stitching at the beginning and the end. Once that's stitched, just shove it in the bag. Now take some time to make sure everything is nice and flat and smoothed out. I want this to look nice and polished. It's a beautiful bag. All right, so now let's do the zipper end. If you have a metal zipper end, you can just add that on to the end of this. I'm gonna sew one on. So the pattern says to take your zipper tail and measure 3 inches away from the end of the zipper accents over there, right here. And then we can just mark 3 inches away from there. Once you have that marked, grab some scissors and cut down your zipper tape. I'm gonna once again use a lighter and just melt down the end. And then I have my zipper tab. This is 1 1/4 inch by 1 1/4 inch, just a little square. I can just fold it in half and I'm just gonna wrap it around the end of my zipper. You can use tape if you'd like, if you're afraid it's gonna move on you. I'm just gonna use clips, and I made sure that both of the edges match up, that it's folded right around the midpoint. And now I'm gonna take this to the sewing machine and I'm just gonna top stitch along the inner raw edge of this piece of vinyl at an 1/8 of an inch seam allowance, back stitching at the beginning and the end. So you see, once you have your zipper end on there, you can just tuck that into the side of the bag. Boop. And there you go. So cute. So now let's work on finishing up our turn lock. So you're gonna wanna work with your flap. I'm gonna flip it like the pattern has it. So I'm gonna look at the accent side of my flap, so right side up. And I'm gonna grab my female end, I guess, of my turn lock. I'm gonna remove the screws from it. Now this can be a little tricky. This does take practice. These were one of the things that were hardest for me when I was first starting out with bag making. So I'm gonna try to give you all the tips I got for this one. So the first thing we wanna do is we wanna measure 5 3/4 of an inch from the seam where the flap is coming out, okay? And you can just use a ruler to help you find where that is. And then you can just draw a line. I'm using an air erasing marker, something that will go away, just like that. And then what I'm gonna do is I'm just gonna fold my flap in half. And at that line, I'm gonna draw like a plus sign. I'm gonna draw another line to make a plus sign. So that gives me my exact midpoint, 5 3/4 down from the seam. All right, that's where we're gonna start. So then we're gonna take, this is called the washer. This is the flat part. You see the other part is like chunky. We want the flat part, the washer. And we're gonna center it over that plus sign that we made and make sure it's not twisted. So you don't want it like this. You want it like this, okay? So center it over your plus sign. And now we want to mark where there's 3 holes. So you see we have a large center hole. I wonder if I should use the darker lead for this. So you have the large center hole and then you have the 2 small screw holes. We want to mark all 3 of those holes using our marking tool. Okay, so here's the challenging part. You want to cut out these holes, and you're going to cut out just outside of what you marked, but you want to keep the fabric. You don't want to just make like a big oval because then this is going to move around, right? You want to keep a bit of fabric between each of the 3 holes. So you have 3 holes, 2 pieces of fabric between each of the 3 holes. That's the goal here. I'm going to start with a seam ripper. And we're going through both layers of our flap for this. And I'm just going to gently seam rip in the center of that middle hole, just a little bit. And I'm going to grab my little tiny scissors. And I'm going to put these in there and I'm going to start cutting just around the outside of my pencil mark. So I'm just working on the center hole for now. All right, so then I'm going to take my open end of my turn lock and I'm just going to make sure that I can push that through my cutout, and I can. So that's great. So now I just need to work on the screw holes. And for the screw holes, I actually find it easiest to use a hole punch if you have it. If you don't, you can use scissors. But I usually have to make them a little bit bigger than I want to. So what you're going to do is you're just going to keep fitting, not the flat washer piece, but the more, you know, protruding piece, because you want these. We want all 3 of these circle pieces that are sticking out to come through the material, including the screw holes. Those need to go through the material. I don't want them just resting on top of it. So I'm just gonna kind of up my hole punch by 1 and just keep doing this. Again, I'm trying to keep even just like the smallest piece of material between all 3 of these holes. I don't want just one big circle here. Okay, and you might have to kind of push down your material around those screw holes. That's okay. If you need to, you can always like take your tip of your scissors and kind of stretch the material to widen the hole a little bit. Okay, and once you have tested it out, that all 3 parts of that turn lock can fit through the material, now we can install it. So once again, I'm going to use some glue to help out with this. So I'm going to put some glue on the back of the, I don't know how to call it. It's not the washer. It's like the pudgier bit, you know, the right side, the pretty side. This is going to go on the exterior part of our flap. It's what you see the most. So you see this is the back side of the flap. This is the exterior side of the flap. We're just going to insert this in there. And then I'm going to flip it over so I'm looking at the lining side. And I'm going to kind of push my material around all the holes to make sure it's exactly the way I want it. All right, so once I see all of the cylinders push through the material, now I know I'm in a good spot, and that looks good. And then I'm going to take my washer. If you'd like, you can also add some glue on the back of your washer. Just be careful with glue. Glue's great, but if it gets on the material, it doesn't always come off, so be careful with it. So then we're going to take our washer. The back of the washer has these little spikes. That's how you know the side that goes against the material. So you're just going to put it over the back, line it up with the 3 cylinders sticking up, and then more glue. Lots of glue. I like to put a tiny bit of glue in each of the screw holes. Once you've got the glue everywhere you want it, we're gonna grab the screwdriver and the screws, and we're going to gently push the screws into their screw holes. I don't know what else to call it. It's a screw hole. And just screw them into place. Let's flip it around. Oh my gosh, isn't that so cute? And then you can just turn your little lock like that. Oh, that's adorable. So you can set the bag part to the side. And the last thing we need to make is the strap. And I'm just making a shoulder strap, not a crossbody. So on the back side of your strap, which is my vinyl cut here, you're going to mark a midpoint line. So it's just right along the edge. It's 1.5 inch in. This is gonna be a 3/4 inch wide strap. And then what you're gonna do is just fold the long edges back, wrong sides together to meet that middle line and clip it in place. I don't use tape here because where that marked line is, that's actually gonna be the very edge of the strap. And if you put tape there and then you fold it all, when you top stitch it, you might end up sewing over like 2 layers of tape sandwiched on top of each other. And I don't like to do that. So I just use clips for this. I find it's easy. This vinyl is easy to work with. So once you have both of your long edges folded back to meet that midpoint line, then you just fold it all again. I like to say it looks like a hot dog bun. And now you don't have any of those long raw edges. So just fold it in half, include each fold in each other's clips. They're buddies now. All right, once you have it all clipped, it should be about 3/4 inch wide. And as long as you want your strap to be, we're gonna top stitch along all the edges at 1/8 inch seam allowance. Back stitch at the beginning and the end. I suggest you start and stop on one of these short raw edges. Okay, so we're actually making this strap a removable strap. So what you wanna do is you wanna take your strap, lay it right side up, take one of your swivel hooks, thread your strap through the swivel hook so the swivel is on the top, and wrap it around. And you could wrap it around however much you want. If you're not going to use any sort of end here, then you're going to want to probably stitch this down or fold it over, but we're using the ends, so we're not going to worry about it. So I'm going to make sure I thread both of my swivel hooks on now because I do have a tendency to forget. So your swivel hooks should both be on the same side, just like that, on the right side. So we're gonna grab one of our metal strap ends, and you gotta decide how you want this to look. When this folds over on the back, that's the side you're gonna see. So I'm gonna make sure that the right side of my strap end, that's the side that doesn't have the screw holes on it, that's gonna be on the right side of my strap. So if I flip this over, it looks like this. The holes on the back of it are gonna go on the back side of the strap. So I am once again going to use glue because I love glue. I'm just going to add a little bit of glue right along the edge of my strap. And then I'm going to carefully insert my strap end over the end of my strap. There we go. Get it nice and tight on there. And then I like to use a stiletto to poke holes in the material for the screw. So I'm just gently poking holes through my vinyl. And you can add glue in the holes as well. I'm not going to this time. But I'm going to take my teeny tiny little screws. Don't lose those. You will never find them on the carpet. And just screw these into place. So the screw should go through your vinyl, which is why we poke the holes with the stiletto. I find if I don't do that, it's pretty difficult to get the screws in. Okay, so now I'm going to fold this end of my strap over my swivel hook. And I just need enough space to put my rivet. If you're not using rivets, you can just stitch this in place. You can fold this over quite a bit, and then you can make like a little box and just stitch around the space between the swivel hook and the strap end. So I'm folding my end over by about 1 3/8 inch. I'm gonna grab my hole punch, and you can mark where you want this ahead of time. I'm just gonna eyeball this and mark it and punch it centered between the swivel and the strap end. Just like that. And then I'll insert my rivet, put my cap on. Doesn't that look cute? So cute. Then I'll grab my rivet press and just press this in place. Easy peasy. So I'm gonna repeat that exactly for the other end of my strap. Okay, bag is done, strap is done. Let's put it all together. How stinking cute is this? Isn't that adorable? It is such a sweet, sweet bag. Perfect for gifting. Perfect for gifting yourself, maybe, or someone else. And if you're a beginner, I hope you learned a lot from this because I do consider this a beginner bag. It doesn't mean it's quick. It doesn't mean it's super easy, but it does mean that it's doable for beginners. So I hope you really enjoy this. All right, what do you think? I mean, it's perfect, right? It's perfect. This vinyl is so cool. The vinyl is really neat because it's a denim. It's like a faux denim vinyl. And it definitely, I was going for denim too today. So it definitely gives that denim feel. But it's so easy. It's way more easy to work with than denim would be. Oh, no unraveling, no thickness, nothing to worry about. Perfect for the strap, perfect for everything. So if you make this bag using the babe box and you post it on social media, please make sure you tag me. Also make sure you tag the Bag Making Bee Club. We want to see your version. Like I've said before, sometimes if you have a few of these boxes, maybe you've been part of the subscription for a few months, you might have material from old boxes, some scraps, maybe material you just haven't gotten to. You can switch it around and then create something totally custom and unique. It's all gonna look really good together. So I love when I see you guys piece things from different boxes together. It's so cool. If you make this bag using the tutorial and you're not using the box, I still wanna see it. So send me an email at jess@OklaRoots.com. You can tag me all over social media. I love seeing your versions. I love knowing that these videos are helpful for you guys. This is a very, not video necessary pattern in my opinion. Like Bagstock patterns are written so well. They're very easy to follow. But you know, if you just like sewing with somebody, I would love to know. I hope you're having a great day. Have a fantastic rest of your week. Get out there and make something. Bye guys.